Imagine standing on the edge of a crack in the earth so massive that it stretches for 277 miles. A place where the rocks beneath your feet are nearly 2 billion years old. A place so vast that weather can be completely different from one side of the canyon to the other. A place visited by millions of people every year. And a place where hundreds of people have died. Today we're traveling to northern Arizona to explore one of the most famous landmarks in the world, the Grand Canyon. But this isn't just a story about a hole in the ground. It's a story about survival, tragedy, mystery, ancient civilizations, missing people, deadly mistakes, and one of the worst aviation disasters in American history. Welcome back to Meals to Unalive For, the podcast where true crime, dark history, conspiracy, and food collide. I'm your host, Jody Breton, and every week we serve up the stories that are as disturbing as they are fascinating, paired with a meal inspired by the chaos. So grab a plate, lock your doors, and let's dig in. Today, we'll be making a dulce de leche tres leches cake, roasted beet and goat cheese salad, a grilled steak, some veggies, and stuffed mini peppers. Long before tourists crowded the overlooks and snapped photographs for social media, before railroads, helicopters, or hiking trails, the Grand Canyon was already ancient beyond human comprehension. The canyon itself stretches approximately 277 miles across northern Arizona, reaching depths of more than a mile and widths of up to 18 miles in some locations. Trying to describe its scale is almost impossible. Photographs don't do it justice. Videos don't do it justice. Even standing at the rim, your brain struggles to process what you're seeing. The canyon is simply too large. Many first time visitors report feeling disoriented because distances are deceptive. What appears to be a short walk across the valley might actually be several miles away. The cliffs seem close enough to touch, yet can take hours to reach. It's a landscape that constantly tricks the human eye. And that's before we even talk about its age. Some of the rock formations exposed within the canyon are nearly 2 billion years old. To put that into perspective, complex animal life didn't exist yet. Dinosaurs wouldn't appear for more than a billion years. The oldest rocks in the canyon are so ancient that they were already old before life began to flourish on the earth. Yet, despite its age, the canyon itself is relatively young. Most scientists believe the Colorado River began carving the modern Grand Canyon around 5 to 6 million years ago. That might sound like an impossibly long time, but in geological terms, it's actually fairly recent. Over millions of years, the river slowly cut through layers of rock, exposing Earth's history like pages in a giant stone book. Every layer tells a story: ancient oceans, deserts, floods, volcanic activity, entire worlds that existed long before humans arrived. The Grand Canyon isn't just a canyon, it's a timeline, a visible record of our planet's past, and for thousands of years, people have called it home. One of the biggest misconceptions about the Grand Canyon is that it was somehow discovered by European explorers. The reality is that people had been living and around the canyon for thousands of years before Europeans ever laid eyes on it. Archaeological evidence suggests humans have occupied the region for at least 12,000 years. Numerous indigenous nations developed deep cultural and spiritual connections to the canyon. Among them were the Hopi, the Havasupai, the Hualapai, the Navajo, the Paiute, and the Zuni peoples. For these communities, the canyon wasn't a tourist attraction. It wasn't a national park. It was home. It provided water, food, shelter, trade routes, and sacred spaces. The Havasupai people in particular have lived within the canyon for centuries. Their name roughly translates to people of the blue-green waters, a reference to the stunning turquoise streams and waterfalls that still draw visitors today. For many indigenous groups, the canyon is considered sacred. Stories passed down through generations describe creation events, spiritual beings, and journeys connected to the landscape. Even today, certain areas remain deeply significant culturally and spiritually. It's important to remember that while millions of tourists visit each year, The canyon was never simply an empty wilderness. It has always been a place filled with human history. The first Europeans known to reach the Grand Canyon arrived in 1540. Spanish explorer Garcia Lopez de Cardenas and his men were searching for the legendary Seven Cities of Gold. Instead, they encountered something entirely unexpected. Standing at the rim, they saw a landscape unlike anything they had ever witnessed. According to historical accounts, they attempted to descend into the canyon in search of water. They failed. The terrain was simply too difficult. Distances were impossible to judge. What looked manageable from above became overwhelming once they began climbing. Eventually, they turned back. It would not be the last time the canyon humbled those who underestimated it. Over the centuries, explorers, prospectors, miners, and adventurers continued to venture into the region. Many returned with incredible stories. Others never returned at all. Which brings us to one of the most important figures in Grand Canyon history, a one-armed Civil War veteran named John Wesley Powell. In 1869, Powell assembled a small team and launched one of the most ambitious expeditions in American history. His goal was simple in theory: travel down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. In practice, it was nearly suicidal. The group entered waters that had never been fully mapped. They faced violent rapids, dangerous terrain, equipment failures, starvation, and constant uncertainty. At times, they had no idea what waited around the next bend. One mistake could send them into rapids powerful enough to destroy boats and kill entire crews. The journey lasted months. Several men abandoned the expedition before it ended. Tragically, 3 members who left near the conclusion of the trip were later killed after encountering local tribes, though the exact circumstances remain debated by historians. Against incredible odds, Powell completed the expedition and became one of the first people to document the canyon in detail. His reports helped introduce the Grand Canyon to a wider American audience. But they also revealed something else. The canyon was beautiful and it was dangerous, very dangerous. A lesson that countless visitors would learn in the decades that followed. Because while the Grand Canyon inspires awe, it has also claimed hundreds of lives. And in the next part of our story, we'll explore the canyon's darker side, the disappearances, the deadly mistakes, and the people who entered one of nature's greatest wonders and never came back out. If the Grand Canyon has taught visitors one lesson over the years, it's this: nature doesn't care how experienced you are, it doesn't care how athletic you are, and it certainly doesn't care how confident you feel standing at the rim. Every year, millions of people visit the Grand Canyon. Most leave with incredible memories and photographs. Some don't leave at all. While the canyon's reputation is often tied to dramatic falls from towering cliffs, those aren't actually the biggest danger. The real killer is often sometimes far less dramatic: heat, dehydration, and overconfidence. Park rangers have a saying: going down is optional, coming back up is mandatory. Every year, visitors underestimate just how difficult the canyon can be. Standing at the rim, temperatures might feel comfortable. A gentle breeze blows across the overlook. Maybe it's 70 degrees. But descend deep enough into the canyon and temperatures can soar well above 100 degrees. The deeper you go, the hotter it gets. Many hikers assume the journey down is the hard part. In reality, it's the opposite. The descent feels easy. Gravity is helping, your energy is high, the views are spectacular. Hours later, when it comes time to climb back out, reality sets in. Exhaustion, heat, dehydration, muscle cramps, heat stroke. Every year, rangers rescue hundreds of visitors who discover too late that they weren't prepared. Some aren't as lucky. Many of the canyon's fatalities are the result of environmental conditions rather than accidents. People run out of water. They ignore warning signs. They attempt hikes beyond their abilities, and the canyon collects another victim. Then there are the falls. The Grand Canyon's cliffs can be deceptive. Visitors often approach the edge for photographs. Some climb over safety barriers. Others search for the perfect selfie. Loose gravel, unstable footing, a sudden gust of wind, and a simple misstep have all contributed to fatal accidents. In many cases, victims fall hundreds of feet. Sometimes recovery operations take days. Sometimes they are impossible. It's a grim reminder that one moment of poor judgment can have irreversible consequences. But not every death in the Grand Canyon is explained. Some people simply disappear. And among those mysteries, none is more famous than the story of Glenn and Bessie Hyde. In October of 1928, Glenn Hyde and his wife Bessie set out on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime. The newlyweds were young, ambitious, and deeply in love. Glenn was an experienced outdoorsman with a bold goal. He wanted to set a speed record navigating the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Bessie, meanwhile, would become one of the first women ever to complete the journey. At least, that was the plan. The couple launched their wooden riverboat and began traveling through the canyon. At first, everything seemed normal. Several people encountered the Hydes along the river and reported that they appeared happy and in good spirits. Then they vanished, completely. Days passed, then weeks. Searchers eventually located their boat, but something was wrong. The vessel was intact, its supplies were still aboard. Food remained untouched. Life jackets were present. Personal belongings were still there. But Glenn and Bessie were gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no obvious evidence of an accident, no bodies, nothing. It was as if the couple had simply stepped out of existence. The disappearance became one of the greatest mysteries in the Grand Canyon history. Some investigators believe the couple drowned. Others questioned that theory. If they drowned, where were the bodies? Why was the boat largely intact? Why were there so many belongings left behind? Over the years, countless theories emerged. Some suggested that they became stranded and died while attempting to hike out. Others proposed foul play. And then came one of the strangest twists. Decades later, rumors began circulating about a woman known as Georgie White. White was a legendary river runner who spent years guiding trips through the canyon. Some people wondered if she was actually Bessie Hyde living under a new identity. The theory gained attention because of certain similarities between the two women, but despite years of speculation, no evidence ever proved the claim. Most historians reject the theory today. Still, the mystery remains unsolved. Nearly a century later, nobody knows for certain what happened to Glenn and Bessie Hyde. The canyon keeps its secrets. And theirs isn't the only disappearance. Throughout the decades, hikers, rafters, and visitors have vanished within the canyon's vast wilderness. Some were eventually found, others remain missing. The sheer size of the landscape creates enormous challenges for search and rescue teams. Imagine trying to find a single person in a maze of cliffs, caves, side canyons, forests, rivers, and rocky terrain covering thousands of square miles. Even modern technology has limitations. Helicopters can't reach every location. Cell service is unreliable. Weather changes rapidly. A person can disappear surprisingly quickly. Yet, despite these dangers, people continue to be drawn to the canyon. Perhaps that's part of its power. The Grand Canyon exists at the intersection of beauty and danger. It inspires awe while demanding respect. For every tragic story, there are countless stories of survival, adventure, and wonder. But sometimes disaster strikes on a scale so massive that it changes history itself. And in the summer of 1956, high above the Grand Canyon, two passenger planes collide in midair. The catastrophe would kill 128 people. It would shock the nation. And it would forever change air travel in the United States. That disaster is where our story heads next. By the summer of 1956, commercial air travel was booming. Americans were flying more than ever. The post-war economy was thriving. Families were traveling across the country, and the skies were becoming increasingly crowded. But air traffic control systems hadn't fully caught up. Radar coverage was limited. pilots often relied on visual separation. And in many parts of the country, aircraft could temporarily leave their assigned routes to avoid weather or give passengers a better view of the landscape below. It was a different era of aviation, an era that would change forever on June 30th, 1956. That morning, two airliners departed from Los Angeles International Airport. The first was the United Airlines Douglas DC-7, carrying 58 people. The second was a Trans World Airlines Lockheed Super Constellation, carrying 70 people. Together, there was 128 souls aboard the two aircraft. Both planes were headed east. Both would pass over northern Arizona. Neither crew had any reason to believe they were on a collision course. As the flights progressed, weather conditions began developing over parts of the Southwest. Pilots requested deviations around storm clouds, something that wasn't unusual. At the time, aircraft flying outside of controlled airspace often had significant freedom in choosing their routes. The Grand Canyon was also a popular sightseeing location from the air. Passengers frequently enjoyed spectacular views of the canyon below. Unfortunately, those circumstances would contribute to one of the deadliest aviation disasters in American history. At approximately 10:30 in the morning, thousands of feet above the Grand Canyon, the two aircraft converged. Neither crew saw the other in time. The United DC-7 slammed into the TWA Super Constellation. The impact was catastrophic. The collision sheared away large portions of both aircraft. Passengers likely had little understanding of what had happened before the planes began breaking apart. Within moments, both aircraft were falling from the sky. There would be no survivors. Far below, visitors and residents reported hearing explosions. Some witnessed smoke trails descending towards the canyon. Others watched debris raining from the sky. At first, nobody knew exactly what had happened, but as reports poured in, authorities realized a major disaster had occurred. The challenge was figuring out where. The Grand Canyon's immense size immediately complicated rescue efforts. Search crews had only a general idea of where the planes had crashed. Finding the wreckage would prove incredibly difficult. Eventually, aircraft searching the area located debris fields deep within the canyon. What researchers discovered was devastating. Both planes had been completely destroyed. The impact had scattered wreckage across rugged and nearly inaccessible terrain. Recovering the victims would become a monumental task. Helicopters were still relatively limited in their capabilities. Many recovery personnel had to climb into remote sections of the canyon using ropes and primitive equipment. Some areas could only be reached by foot. Others required dangerous helicopter operations. The recovery effort took weeks. Every one of the 128 passengers and crew members had been killed. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in world history. News of the crash shocked the nation. For many Americans, it shattered the perception that commercial aviation was becoming completely safe. People wanted answers. How could two large passenger aircraft collide in clear daylight? How had nobody prevented it? And perhaps more importantly, could it happen again? The investigation revealed uncomfortable truths. Air travel was growing faster than the systems designed to manage it. Aircraft was moving through crowded skies without the comprehension radar tracking and air traffic control and infrastructure that passengers take for granted today. The tragedy exposed serious weakness in the nation's aviation system. In many ways, the disaster became a turning point. The public demanded change, lawmakers demanded change, and the aviation industry demanded change. The result was a complete overhaul of American air traffic management. The federal government invested heavily in radar systems. Air traffic control procedures were modernized. New regulations were created to better separate aircraft. Eventually, these reforms contributed to the creation of the modern aviation safety system we know today. In a strange and tragic way, the disaster over the Grand Canyon helped make future air travel significantly safer. The lessons learned were written in blood. Today, portions of the wreckage still remain within the canyon. National Park Service officials have left some debris in place as a memorial to the victims and as a reminder of the disaster's historical significance. Most visitors pass through the canyon completely unaware that pieces of one of aviation's most important crash sites still rest among the rocks below. Hidden in plain sight, much like so many of the canyon stories. But perhaps no Grand Canyon mystery has captured the public imagination quite like the legend of the lost Egyptian cave. It sounds like something straight out of an adventure movie. In April of 1909, an Arizona newspaper published a shocking front page story. According to the article, an explorer traveling through the Grand Canyon had discovered the entrance to a massive hidden cavern high above the Colorado River. Inside were supposedly hundreds of rooms. Mummies, ancient weapons, hieroglyphics, statues, and artifacts that appeared to be Egyptian in origin. The article claimed the discovery was so significant that the Smithsonian Institution had secretly become involved. If the story was true, it would mean that an ancient civilization from across the ocean had somehow reached North America thousands of years before Columbus. It was an archaeological discovery that would have rewritten history. There was only one problem. Nobody could find the cave. No artifacts were ever produced. No excavation records existed. No evidence surfaced that the expedition had actually happened. As researchers dug deeper, the story began to unravel. The explorers named in the article appeared to leave no trace behind. The Smithsonian denied having any record of the discovery, and no reputable archaeological evidence had ever been found to support the claim. Most historians now believe the entire story was a newspaper hoax. Yet more than a century later, people still search for the cave. Some believe it remains hidden somewhere within the canyon's countless cliffs and side passages. Others believe the discovery was covered up, and some simply enjoy the mystery. Whether it was a clever publicity stunt or the greatest archaeological cover up in history depends entirely on who you ask. But one thing is certain: the lost Egyptian cave has become part of Grand Canyon folklore, a legend almost as enduring as the canyon itself. Of course, no discussion of the Grand Canyon mysteries would be complete without talking about the creatures that some people believe call the canyon home. For as long as humans have lived in and around the canyon, stories have circulated about strange beings lurking among the cliffs, forests, and shadows. Some of these tales are rooted in indigenous traditions that stretch back centuries. Others are modern legends born from campfires, internet forums, and the human tendency to find mystery in places that feel unknowable. And few places feel more unknowable than the Grand Canyon. One of the most famous legends connected to the Southwest is that of the Deer Woman or Deer Lady. In various indigenous traditions, Deer Woman is described as a beautiful woman who appears alone in remote places. At first glance, she seems completely normal, but those who look closely may notice something unsettling: deer hooves where her feet should be. Depending on the tradition, Deer Woman serves different roles. In some stories, she punishes men who prey on women and children. In others, she lures travelers away from safety and into danger. While stories of Deer Woman aren't unique to the Grand Canyon, sightings and encounters have been reported throughout Arizona and the surrounding Southwest for generations. If you'd like to learn more about the Deer Lady, there is a miniature episode that I put out earlier this week. I just didn't want to put all of that information in this episode here. Another figure that frequently appears in stories from northern Arizona is the skinwalker. According to Navajo tradition, a skinwalker is not a cryptid in the traditional sense, but a malevolent witch capable of taking on animal forms. Witnesses who believe they've encountered one often describe unnaturally fast creatures running on all fours, glowing eyes watching from the darkness, or voices calling out from places where no one should be. It's important to note that many Navajo people consider skinwalker stories to be a serious cultural topic rather than entertainment, and discussions about them are often approached with caution and respect. Then there's Arizona's answer to Bigfoot, the Mogollon monster. Named after the Mogollon Rim of northern Arizona, this creature is described as a massive, hairy humanoid standing anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall. Witnesses often report an overwhelming foul odor, strange screams echoing through the forest, and footprints far larger than those of an ordinary person. While most sightings occur in Arizona's mountain forests rather than the canyon itself, stories occasionally emerge from the remote regions surrounding the canyon where vast stretches of wilderness remain largely untouched. Perhaps the most dramatic creature said to soar above the canyon is the legendary Thunderbird. In indigenous traditions throughout North America, the Thunderbird is often described as a powerful supernatural bird capable of creating thunder and storms with the beating of its wings. Modern sightings describe enormous birds casting shadows across the landscape, creatures so large that witnesses struggle to estimate their wingspan. Skeptics often point to condors, eagles, and other large birds as likely explanations. Believers remain unconvinced. And then there are stories that defy easy categorization. Visitors have reported seeing phantom hikers who vanish around bends in the trail, voices calling for help from empty canyons, figures standing on distant cliffs before disappearing moments later, strange lights moving across remote sections of the canyon after dark. Most of these stories have perfectly ordinary explanations. Fatigue, isolation, distance, changing light conditions, and the sheer scale of the landscape can play tricks on even experienced observers. But not every visitor is satisfied with that answer, and perhaps that's why these legends endure. The Grand Canyon is a place where a person can stand on the edge of one of the largest natural wonders on Earth and feel very, very small. The canyon stretches for hundreds of miles. Its depth can seal caves, hidden side canyons, and remote wilderness that few people will ever see. It is ancient, it's vast, and in many ways still very mysterious. Whether the creatures said to inhabit it are real or simply products of folklore and imagination is ultimately up to each person to decide. But if there is one place where people are willing to believe that something unknown might still be hidden in the shadows, it's the Grand Canyon. Because that's the thing about the Grand Canyon. Most people visit expecting to see a natural wonder. And they do. They find breathtaking views, incredible landscapes, and some of the oldest exposed rock on Earth. But they also find a place filled with human stories. Stories of explorers pushing beyond the limits of what they thought possible. Stories of indigenous communities whose connection to the canyon stretches back thousands of years. Stories of hikers who underestimate nature. Stories of people who disappear without a trace. Stories of tragedy and stories of survival. The Grand Canyon is often described as timeless, and in some ways that's true. The canyon existed long before any of us arrived, and it will remain long after we're gone. Civilizations have come and gone. Empires have risen and fallen. Generations have lived, loved, and died along its rim, yet the canyon remains, silent, patient, and unchanged. Maybe that's why the Grand Canyon fascinates us. It's beautiful enough to inspire awe, dangerous enough to command respect, and mysterious enough to keep us wondering. Because even after centuries of exploration, there are still unanswered questions hidden among its cliffs and shadows. There are still stories waiting to be told, and there are still mysteries that may never be solved. For millions of visitors each year, the Grand Canyon is simply a destination. For others, it's an adventure. For some, it's a sacred place. And for a few unfortunate souls, it became the last place they would ever see. The Grand Canyon is one of nature's greatest masterpieces, but like many masterpieces, it has a dark side. And sometimes when we look into the canyon, we're reminded of something humanity has always struggled to accept. Nature is beautiful, nature is powerful, and nature always gets the final word. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and I hope you enjoyed this meal. I know I certainly did. I think I liked the stuffed mini peppers probably the best, but again, all of it was delicious. And I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.